We now interrupt our programming for an HDNet Inside MMA special report, live from Las Vegas. Now, our host, Kenny Rice.
We are live here at the Extreme Couture Gym. This is a rare moment because no one is working out at this time. All the action will be taking place in a matter of moments behind me in the ring, when one of the most famous fighters on the planet, an MMA legend, Randy Couture, will hold his first public press conference for the masses since he made his announcement of resigning from the UFC just over a week ago. Couture has been out of the country until the last few days. He has been filming a movie in South Africa with The Rock. It's Scorpion King follow-up, and so he's now an actor. Is he still a fighter? Has he resigned? Has he retired? Those questions we expect to be answered coming up in just a matter of moments. Some of the things we do know for sure is that Dana White, the UFC president, in a release a matter of days ago, just after Couture announced that he had resigned from the UFC, countered that by saying that Couture had indeed retired from the UFC, saying, and we quote, "We all know Randy retired before. The landscape in MMA changes every day. So when he is ready to come out of retirement again, he is still under contract with me, and I'm ready to promote him." End of quote. That from Dana White. Now, we would point out that we have tried to contact Dana White. We did ask the UFC if there was a chance that we could do an interview with him, and they have declined that interview. We also expect Fedor Emelianenko will be brought up. As you know, he signed a big contract earlier this week. There's been that anticipation. Would Couture ever meet Fedor? That is the much anticipated discussion. That, too, should probably come up. Randy Couture now has made his way into the ring. Let's join him now to find out on this day of reckoning.
There's a bunch of people actually here that showed up. So first of all, thank you guys for all coming. I had no idea that this was going to be such a big deal. And I have a lot of people to thank. First and foremost, I thank my wife, who's been my biggest fan and been encouraging to me and supportive to me over the last 3 years since we've been together. And we're just coming off of a wonderful trip to South Africa, where I got the chance to work on my 7th motion picture and the biggest role that I've had to date. And I think being out of cell phone range and getting to spend some time together was sorely needed. And so I really appreciate her. My staff here at Extreme Couture, Val and Scott, and everybody here that works here, that allows me to run around and do all the other things that I do to keep this ship floating. We couldn't do it without them. My team, all the guys that are in here sweating and bleeding with me every day, who in my absence this last month have been fielding a lot of questions that should have been directed at me. And their support and the integrity that they demonstrate day in and day out for me and this sport is greatly appreciated. And they're my brothers, and I appreciate that. I guess this is my opportunity to kind of tell my side of things. And you know, there have been some questions and some statements, some good, some bad. And so I'll try to address any questions that you guys have. Historically, I've had issues with Zuffa and the company since they bought it in 2001. I got off on the wrong foot over the ancillary rights in my contract and signing away my name and image, which then led to the video game and having myself pulled out of the video game, pulled out of the ad campaigns with Carmen Electra and all those things, because I wasn't willing to just sign those things away like most fighters had done to date at that point. And I think that immediately put me on the outs with the manager, with Dana, and with the people who own the company. And from that point on, I've felt like I've been swimming against the current. I've been counted out on several occasions, from Pedro Izzo to Chuck Liddell on up the line. It's been public knowledge. Dana's said those things himself. I think more importantly, it's the little things that make athletes feel appreciated that weren't done. weren't being done from my perspective that were done for a lot of other athletes. Everybody's trying to make a big deal out of the money. And this was never a money issue. It's been a prevailing feeling of respect that wasn't being given. For 11 years of my life, I've spent trying to represent this sport with integrity, represent this sport in a particular way, for the owners before and the owners now. And I've never felt like that was appreciated, like I was put out there and used appropriately. And there's been, I could cite a lot of examples over the years that have made me feel that way, but it starts to sound petty. And, you know, I feel the way I feel. I've got no hard feelings. I think that the Fertittas and Dana White have done a marvelous job in saving our sport. I think our sport was going to die. Does that mean I agree with all the decisions they've made and how they've treated a lot of people? No, I don't agree with a lot of that. But I've been taken care of. I'm the last guy that's going to complain. People are going to make a big, ask questions of, oh, you signed a contract 8 months ago. You seemed perfectly happy with that contract then. No, I wasn't happy with that contract then. I asked for a signing bonus. I knew a lot of other athletes were getting signing bonuses. In the year that I was out, the landscape changed financially for a lot of us as athletes, which is great. It needed to. And I felt like after all that I'd accomplished and all the stuff that I'd put on the line and all the sacrifices that I'd made with my family and with my team to represent this sport and do whatever needed to be done, whatever I was asked to do, whether they were booking the tickets or I was booking the tickets, I was running around this country trying to promote this sport and build this thing. Was I the only guy? No. There was a lot of guys that were responsible for that. But I wasn't happy with the contract, but it wasn't really about that. It wasn't about the zeros. I still wanted to fight. And in a negotiation, if you're not willing to walk away, then you take whatever they're willing to give you. I was told, no, we can't give you a signing bonus. I know Tim and Matt and several of the other fighters had been given signing bonuses. I didn't really understand why I wasn't worthy of one, but it didn't really matter. What ultimately I wanted to do was fight. So I accepted the contract then, moved on, fought. And if you look at yourselves as reporters who've worked for a particular company or particular magazine and wrote and made sacrifices and done the best you could, and they pull another guy in from another organization because they want him, and they pay him coming in more than you've ever been paid, are you going to feel a little insulted and hurt about that? After you've been there for 11 years, busting your ass? That was kind of the final straw for me, seeing what a lot of these guys from Pride were getting paid or offered, what even other guys, I mean, it was cited that Chuck Liddell made $17 million last year from his fighting. I have here my 2 bout agreements for Tim Sylvia and Gabriel Gonzaga that have the numbers on them that I was paid. I'll give those to Kevin. He can start there because he's the one that wrote the article in Yahoo that stated some grossly inflated numbers about what I get paid. Now, the only thing that's not listed on that is what my pay-per-view cut is. Depending on what the sales of the pay-per-view are, I get a piece of that. I'm one of the few athletes that had leverage enough to negotiate for a piece of the pay-per-view. That amounted to about $500,000, at least to date, for the last Chuck fight and the Tim Sylvia fight. Those numbers are still out on the Gabriel Gonzaga fight. They take about 90 days to come in. So if you take the $250,000 that's on that bout sheet right there, and you add the $500,000 that I generally get in pay-per-view, that comes to, do the math. Certainly nothing in the neighborhood of $12 to $15 million that was stated. I don't know where those numbers came from, but it doesn't really matter to me because it's never been about the zeros. I would have fought anyway and did fight anyway. But that was kind of the final straw, the final insult, the final thing to me that said, you know what, they just don't appreciate me. The Fedor fight goes away because Fedor chooses to sign with another organization, which at my stage of my career is the only fight that really makes sense. And so it makes more sense for me to resign and walk away. And so that's why I made the decision that I made. Now, it's been stated that my agent, my Hollywood agent, which is funny to me because he's not my Hollywood agent. My Hollywood agent is Brett Norsberg. He's the one that gets me in TV shows and movies and all those things. And I've been doing movies for 5 years now. This was my 7th motion picture, so it's not like Hollywood and motion pictures and that sort of thing is a new thing to me. I haven't changed. I've been juggling. I'm a fighter first and foremost. Doors have opened through athletics that have allowed me to enjoy doing some pictures and doing some acting and some of that stuff, and it's getting better, certainly. But Matt Walker is not my Hollywood agent. He doesn't even get paid for my MMA contracts. He simply helps me perpetuate the brand that I've spent 11 years building. He helps me get endorsements. He helps me with my nonprofit foundation that supports the GIs. He's my sports agent. And he's done nothing but go to the UFC and help facilitate the UFC supporting a lot of the things that I try to do to represent the sport and represent myself in a positive way. And yes, if I went myself and asked Dana for those things, he would probably say, yeah, here, if I do it myself. But I, like him, am hard to get a hold of. I've got a million things going on, 5 businesses that I run. I can't go and ask him myself. And if my staff, Val, or anybody else asks, or my sports agent goes and asks, the answer is always no. From things as small as tickets, extra tickets for family and friends at events, to hotel rooms and things like that that were in support of the GI Foundation fundraiser that I put on here. All those things are small mitigating factors into this overall feeling that I'm just another fighter and I get no respect from the organization. And I'm tired of swimming upstream. I'm tired of fighting against the current. Something needs to change. I tendered my resignation after having a face-to-face meeting with Dana White and Lorenzo Fertitta, where I laid all this out in person 2.5 weeks before I left for South Africa. Told them exactly how I feel. The same discussion that we're having right now, I had with Dana and Lorenzo. From the Fedor offer and the money and all these things, and there are other instances that I cited that, again, I don't want to get petty. It's not about that. So I gave them a chance to respond. I didn't understand why I got overlooked and not given a bonus in my last fight. I brought all those things to their attention and expected some sort of response. I got no response. I waited 2.5 weeks. I saw them all face-to-face again at the Anaheim show. I had my letter of resignation at that meeting face-to-face. I could have tendered it right there. But I wanted to give them the opportunity to respond to the things that I stated as issues for me. I got no response. And so I tendered my letter of resignation after that, 2.5 weeks later. So they were given every opportunity. I expressed face-to-face how I felt with them. And it's not about bashing. I'm not going to get into words with Dana. Dana said some other things. He controls me and everything else. It doesn't really matter. It's not about that. I have no hard feelings towards Lorenzo, and Frank certainly not. They've done a masterful job of using their connections and their influence to build this sport back up. Dana, although misunderstood and I don't agree with some of the things that he does, I don't think he's a bad guy necessarily. I think he wields a lot of power and a big stick, and he doesn't do that with the best of conscience all the time. But it's not about bashing Dana. I'm not going to get into a pissing match with Dana. That'd be stupid, and it's not really about that. It's just about how I feel as an athlete that's represented this organization for 11 years and done my very best to represent this sport, and feeling unappreciated for that. It's that simple. So I think that I've addressed all the issues to this point. If there's anybody that has any questions or anything else that they feel needs to be addressed, now would be the time. In the back.
Yeah, I have a question. This is Nakosa from ProLeague.com. Can you address the ambiguity of the UFC contract regarding the the contract locked by bout number instead of term of contract? What I can speak is like.
I think both things are pertinent in the contract.
You gotta speak right into it. Let me say this.
That's fine.
Go ahead.
I think both things are pertinent to the contract. It's whatever the number of bouts are that you sign for and a term. Those bouts have to occur in that term. That's my understanding and my lawyer's understanding of the contract. If it's an 18-month contract with 4 fights, then those 4 fights need to occur in that 18-month period. That's my understanding of the contract.
So was there a clause that would different than the typical UFC contract that would allow you to leave at 9 months, or is it just is there just ambiguity over that?
Well, I think that's interpretation of a contract, and again, it's not really about leaving and going and fighting somewhere else. My loyalty has always been with the UFC. I was offered to fight Fedor over a year ago when I wanted to come out of retirement for $3 million in Bodog. This is more than I'd ever been paid for a fight. What did I do? I went to Dana and Lorenzo and told them, hey, this is what these guys are offering me to fight Fedor in their show. I would be interested in fighting again. They said, well, if you're interested in fighting again, we need someone to fight Tim Sylvia, fight for the heavyweight championship with us. And that's what I did.
I'm John Randy from the Fight Network. Are you saying that you're retired from the sport of mixed martial arts, or that you've simply left the UFC?
I'm saying that I've simply left the UFC at this stage. It would be silly for me to sit here and say I'm going to retire again. Nobody's going to buy that crap anyway.
Is it your intention, though, to fight?
I don't know. You know, I don't have a crystal ball. I don't know what the future's going to hold. You know, I certainly have fights left in me. There's only really one fight that makes a lot of sense, and I would have hoped that that could happen in the UFC with Fedor. I don't think that's going to happen.
Should that fight happen, Randy, could you take that fight? I mean, contractually, right now, if that fight happens within a matter of months, are you still under a UFC contract?
I'm under a UFC contract for a minimum of 9 more months. Sign an 18-month contract with the UFC. So unless that fight happens in the UFC, it's not going to happen anywhere else for at least 9 months.
With everything that's happened so far, could you foresee that you get together with Dana and things work out, that something could happen still under the umbrella of the UFC and that you could fight? Because obviously earlier this week when Fedor made his announcement, Monty Cox said that they would look to fight outside of the M1 organization if necessary, if they could work out a deal.
I suppose anything is possible. And like I said, I don't have huge animosity towards Dana or anybody in the UFC. So, I mean, anything is possible. There's been no such discussions. At this point, it's all about this resignation, so.
Randy, the one thing I don't understand, 2 points. You know, you said it wasn't about money. You repeatedly mentioned money in your statement. And then number 2, when you had the bully pulpit and you were a fighter, you were the light heavyweight champ, the heavyweight champ, why not bring it up then when the most people were watching you, as opposed to, you know, later, A, when you were out of the country, and B, you know what I'm saying? I mean, if you would have done...
Well, like I said, I had a face-to-face meeting with the people that mattered, the owner and the manager of the company, and it wasn't about making public statements about any of this. I could have complained all along about a lot of stuff that was done and made public statements, but I suck it up. I'm not one that bitches. I'm loyal. I've been here to fight, and predominantly that's what I do. So I could have made a lot of public statements. I'm not like that.
Well, I guess I'm saying, do you think that would have mitigated the circumstance or changed it had you...
Yeah, it would have made it worse.
It would have made it worse?
If I'd have come out and made public statements inflammatory to the way I was being treated as an athlete while I was still planning on fighting and trying to negotiate contracts and do all those things, I think it would have made it worse. I think there would have been reprisals for those comments, and I went right to the people that can affect a change, non-public, and I resigned in a way that I thought would allow me to just go away. I wasn't trying to make a big stink about anything. I never stepped out and bashed anybody. I simply stated my feelings and why I was resigning.
Randy, hi, I'm Joyce with RawVegas.tv. Do you think it's fair that fighters whose fights are shown on pay-per-view are walking away with about $5,000? And do you think that you're leading the fact that your fellow extreme camp members will follow in footsteps?
Well, I can't speak for anybody else and what they want to do with their careers. If me doing this as the heavyweight champion in some way affects some change for some of the other fighters that are trying to scratch out a living, then that's great. I mean, I'm a fighter first and foremost, and I think we all want it to be better for everybody. I think we'd like, better medical coverage for not just in competition when we get hurt in the show, but the rest of the time. We're in here every day training. A lot of things happen here. The guys that are getting ready for fights that have blown their knees out and other things, and now it's up to them to foot the cost of getting those repairs done so that they can continue on with their careers. There's a lot of things that could be better for fighters. Certainly fighters still making $2,000 and $3,000 to fight. I mean, I just, it's a shame.
Randy, here at Radio, you said that you asked for a bonus after your last fight. Is that something that isn't in the contract? Is that like up to management's discretion, or how does a fighter get a bonus? Do they come to you, or you have to ask, or how does that work?
It's most definitely at the management's discretion, and I think that's one of the ways that the UFC has stated time and again that I'm the number 2 athlete on the books as far as my contract, what my base pay says right there in that bout agreement. But then what happens is they pay you a visit in your locker room after your fight, and they give you a bonus check that's not on the books anywhere. It's at their it's for some of the athletes, it's standard practice. You come to expect that. A lot of the marquee guys that are selling pay-per-views and putting butts in the seats get those bonus checks. And certainly we're happy to get the extra money, but it's at their discretion. I got that for the last Chuck fight. I got that for the Tim Sylvia fight. For whatever reason, I didn't get that for the Gonzaga fight. And I question that. It makes a big difference in my pay.
Was there any explanation given? Because it was a hell of a fight. I mean,
there was no real explanation given for that.
Randy,
scary guy. Damn.
Randy, from what you've said,
Is the damage irreparable with Dana White, and what would it take for you to decide to
Is anything irreparable? I don't know if there's anything that's irreparable. I don't know what it would take, but I felt this way for a long time. Finally, like I said, the straw that forced me to make a decision was knowing what a lot of other guys were being compensated with bonuses and so forth, and the offer to Fedor, who's being offered more in signing bonus than I'd ever been paid for a fight from another organization when I've been here 11 years with this company, trying to promote this company. And that was like the final slap in the face. And again, I'm not saying I wasn't going to ask for a renegotiation of my contract because of that, even if Fedor had signed. But I don't think anything's irreparable, but I think it's time to move on, and I've got a lot of other things going on. I'm kind of tired of feeling this way.
have you had dialogue with Dana since you've come back from South Africa? Have you and Dana discussed any of these things that have been said?
I talked to Dana and Lorenzo both on the phone yesterday, and those conversations weren't shouting matches. They weren't degrading in any way. I told them both, I'm not trying to hurt the organization. I'm not trying to burn the house down as it was put to me. I'm simply stating my feeling and where I'm at in this decision and why it was made, and pointed out that it's all the same stuff that I said to them to their face 6 weeks ago, before all this happened.
Did you get any kind of gut feeling, at least from that conversation, if nothing definitive, that there is a possibility that you could fight again in the UFC and that things could be worked out for the remaining of this contract?
There was no real discussion to that effect. There were comments made, particularly by Dana, that they'd like me to come back, but like I said, I've given them the opportunity to respond to the things I put on the table, and no response was made, and anything could happen. I don't know.
Randy, you say that most fighters aren't compensated properly. Does a fighters union make sense at this point in the game?
fighters union is something that's been talked about for a couple of years, but nobody really knows. I mean, most of the fighters that I see are mismanaged at this point. The managers aren't really taking care of their fighters either, and I think that's part of the reason why Dana hates managers so much as well. He sees them as parasites and all the other things, nice things that he says about them. But you know, I think with the change in landscape, with Pride gone, no real competition at this stage of things for the UFC owning not only Pride, the UFC brand, and the WEC, there's almost this monopoly that's been built that the fighters don't have a lot of other options. And so for the fighters to get together and unite, and in some ways these bonuses that are kind of off the books have united a lot of the fighters in communicating about who's getting paid what, and you know, kind of off the public record of what everybody thinks everybody's getting paid. But it's never been anybody who stepped up and united the fighters in a real sense of an association or a union.
But doesn't that have to start with fighters like yourself and Chuck, some of the guys that are...
There has to be...
Randy Couture trying to clear some of the air here today. Basically, as you might have heard, Randy Couture admits he is still under contract with the UFC. He has resigned, not retired, but as I asked him just a few moments ago, he has talked with Dana White as recently as yesterday. He has not ruled out the possibility that he will fight again for the UFC. While he did say it's not a money issue, he did spend a lot of time talking about the zeros. And by the way, the contract that he set down at the side of the ring and said, this is what I've made my last 2 fights, I had a chance to look at it, and that contract read that he made $250,000 base when he fought Tim Sylvia. He made another $250,000 when he fought Gabriel Gonzaga in his last fight. And he has made $1 for every $100,000 for every 100,000 pay-per-view in the audience. He gets $1 for that, up to $3 for every 330,000 pay-per-view. So he's made more money on the pay-per-view than the actual fight. Now, coming up on Inside MMA tomorrow night at 9:30, we'll have more on this. Ron Kruk will also have his story on Fedor Emelianenko, who has made his big signing earlier this week for a multi-million-dollar contract. As you heard Couture refer to that, that's a contract he wished he could work out with the UFC. All that coming up tomorrow night at 9:30 Eastern Time, right here on HDNet on Inside MMA. For now, that is the story here in Las Vegas. I'm Kenny Rice reporting live. Thanks for watching.